I knew something was wrong in that house for months before a single soul said a word about it out loud. That's the strange gift of being a guard, the one nobody tells you about when you sign up. You become furniture. You become scenery. People stop seeing you not because they're cruel, but because you're trained to be unseen, still and silent and giving nothing back. And a person the eye slides off of becomes, in time, a person the mind forgets is there at all. They talk in front of you the way they talk in front of a clock on the wall. They let their faces do things in front of you that they'd never let those faces do in company. And because of all that, you see everything. That's the trade. You give up being a person in the room, and in exchange, you become the one who sees what the people in the room are really doing. You see who drifts together to whisper in the far corners. You see which smiles climb all the way up to the eyes and which ones stop at the mouth. You see the small wrong things, a glance held a half-second too long, a warmth that switches off the instant a back is turned, that the family, busy and trusting and surrounded by their own bright, important lives, walk straight past without a flicker. I'd been seeing them for months, and I'd said not one word because what in God's name does a guard say, and to whom, and on the strength of what? A feeling. You cannot take a feeling up the chain of command. I'd like to report, sir, that one of the family's most trusted people gives me an odd feeling. They'd have me assessed, and they'd be right too. So I carried it instead, month after month. The slow, sickening, growing certainty that someone close to the family, someone trusted, someone smiling, someone they'd taken right into the soft center of their lives, was quietly working at something they had no business working at. And I had no proof of anything, no standing to speak. No one on this earth who would have believed the man in the tall hat over the warm, capable woman the whole household adored. Until a 7-year-old child said, out loud, in front of everyone, at the precise moment it could still matter, the exact thing I had spent months only being able to think. Let me take you back to how it built. This was all at Marlowe Court, the family's country residence, out in the deep green heart of Westbourne, a long way from the noise of the capital. It was a beautiful old house, Marlowe, quieter than the city palaces by a mile, fewer crowds at the gates, fewer cameras over the wall, none of the relentless public glare. It was the place the family went to actually breathe. Long unrolling lawns that went gold at the end of summer. Great old cedar trees, the kind that have stood so long they feel like they're watching you. A lake down past the lower gardens where the children fed the ducks. In summer there was no better posting in the whole service, and I'd had it for years, long enough to know the place down to its bones. Long enough to know the staff, and their moods, and the family, and their rhythms. And long enough, crucially, to know without thinking when something in those rhythms had gone wrong. You feel it after years. The way a man who's worked a particular sea for decades feels weather coming before there's a cloud in the sky. And that summer the weather had changed. Something in the rhythm of Marlowe had gone wrong, and gone on being wrong and got slowly, steadily worse. The trouble had a name. I'd never once have said it aloud back then. You don't, you can't, not as a guard, not without proof, but I knew the name, and I'll give it to you now. Her name was Mrs. Hale, Vesper Hale. She had come into the household a year or so before all this. A senior position, something to do with the family's private affairs, the running of the household, the money, the arrangements, the 1,000 quiet threads that hold a great family's life together. She'd been brought in properly. Vouched for, recommended, references all in order, the whole thing. Trusted from the first day and trusted more every day after. And she was very good at being trusted. I want you to understand that because it's the whole of how these things work. That was her real gift, not the work itself, though she was capable enough at that, but the trust. She was warm, smooth as still water. Endlessly, tirelessly helpful, always the first to offer, the first to handle a difficulty, the first to take a weight off someone's shoulders before they'd even named it. The family came to adore her, and quickly. Oh, Vesper handles all that. Vesper will know. Don't worry about it, ask Vesper. Within a year she'd made herself so indispensable that the household couldn't picture itself running without her, and that speed, that sheer velocity of becoming necessary, is the thing that should have rung a bell in somebody. It didn't ring one in the family. They were grateful. Why wouldn't they be? Someone had appeared who made everything easier. But I was a guard, and I watched the corners of that house that the family never saw, the after hours, the back passages, the moments when the performance came off. And what I saw of Vesper Hale, when she believed no one who mattered was watching, did not match, in any single particular, the warm, helpful woman the family saw. I won't pretend I'd worked out her whole design. I hadn't. I never saw the master plan laid out. People like Vesper Hale don't leave it lying about. What I saw were pieces, fragments, small wrong things one at a time that I gathered up over the months without quite knowing what I was building. I saw her in rooms she had no earthly reason to be in, the family's private studies, the estate office late, after the house had gone to bed, with papers spread out, working at something by lamplight that the daylight version of her job didn't require. I saw her ease people out. That was the pattern that frightened me most, once I saw it for what it was. There was an old steward, Brearley, a good man, decades of faithful service, the kind of old retainer who'd have walked into a fire for the family and knew where every body in the house was buried, metaphorically speaking. He knew the family's affairs better than anyone alive. And over a few short months, quietly, on one gentle pretext after another, Brearley was eased toward the door. Poor Brearley, he's getting on. Poor Brearley, his memory's not what it was. Poor Brearley, I do worry the work's too much for him now. All of it warm, all of it concerned, all of it from Vesper. And out went Brearley with a nice send-off and everyone's thanks, and into the gap he left came a new person, Vesper's person. Someone who answered to her. And I watched that happen again, and again. The long time, the loyal, the ones who'd known the family before she came, eased out, one by one, always gently, always with a reasonable reason, always replaced by someone whose loyalty ran to her. And I watched the family's circle draw slowly, slowly tighter. I watched the number of people who could reach them, who could speak to them freely, who could put a thing in front of them that hadn't passed through Vesper's hands first. I watched that number shrink, month by month, like a noose drawing closed so slowly you'd never feel it tighten. None of it, and this is the genius and the horror of it, none of it was a crime you could put your finger on. Not one piece. Each single thing taken on its own had a perfectly innocent face, and she always, always had that innocent face ready, warm and reasonable and a little sad. Old men do retire. Households do change their staff. Someone has to handle the family's affairs, and isn't it lucky they've got someone so capable? Every brick in the wall she was building had a sweet and sensible explanation, and the whole structure only ever became visible if you stood far enough back to see all the bricks at once, and almost nobody in that busy, trusting house ever stood far enough back. I did, because I had nothing in the world to do all day but stand still in one spot and watch. That's the whole of the job, and that summer it made me the only adult in the house who could see the shape forming. And from where I stood, the shape was an ugly one. It was the shape of a person quietly, patiently making herself into the only door, the only way to the family, the only hand on the money, the only voice that reached their ears unfiltered, cutting them off, strand by strand, from everyone who'd known them and loved them before she came, and doing it so gently with so much warmth that they thanked her for it the whole way down. And there was one other person in that house who'd seen it, who may, in fact, have seen it before I had, because she wasn't watching the corners and the papers and the after-hours rooms the way I was. She was watching the people, which it turns out is the better place to look. Princess Elise, 7 years old. The youngest of the family at Marlow that long golden summer, and she was one of those children, and you'll have met one somewhere and underestimated her too. We all do, who is far, far cleverer than any grown-up gives her credit for, and who watches. Quiet, solemn, a great stillness in her for a child so small. The sort of 7-year-old who goes silent in a room full of company, and the adults all assume she's bored or shy or daydreaming. And the truth is she's reading every single person in that room like a book she's already half finished, taking in the tones and the faces and the little wrongnesses underneath the words, missing nothing. And Princess Elise did not like Vesper Hale, not one bit, not from early on. How children take against grown-ups all the time for no reason on earth, and the family treated Elise's dislike as exactly that. A child's whim, a passing thing. Don't be silly, Elise. Mrs. Hale is perfectly lovely. Be polite to her now. They were sure she'd taken against the woman because Vesper had told her once to tidy her toys or to come in from the garden or some such small grown-up imposition. That's how grown-ups read a child's dislike, as a grievance over nothing, a sulk that'll pass. But I watched Elise watch Vesper across that summer, and I knew it wasn't a whim, because it was the very same thing I was doing. Only the child was better at it than I was. The little girl had noticed the thing that had taken me weeks to be sure of, that the warm, smiling lady was a different person when the family weren't looking. And children catch that faster than any adult ever could, because they haven't yet been trained to be fooled by a good performance. We grown-ups learn, over a lifetime, to trust the words people say and the faces they choose to show. It's called being polite, being civilized, giving people the benefit of the doubt. Children haven't learned it yet. They read the tone under the words and the face under the face, the raw true signal, and they believe what they read there over anything they're told. And little Elise had seen the warmth drop off Vesper Hale's face the instant the family's backs were turned, seen it 100 times, that switch flicking off and on, and she had quietly filed away every single instance, in whatever careful drawer a watchful 7-year-old keeps such things. And once or twice that summer she tried to tell someone. I knew because I'd half heard it and because the staff talked. I don't like Mrs. Hale. She's not nice when you're not there. Plain as that. The plain true report of a child who'd seen something real. And every time the grown-ups had done the grown-up thing, patted her head, smiled indulgently, told her not to tell tales, told her it wasn't kind to say such things about poor Mrs. Hale who worked so hard for them all. So she'd gone quiet about it. The way children always do in the end, when no one will believe them, they learn there's no point in the telling, and they stop telling, and they keep it inside instead. She kept watching, and she kept her own counsel, this small, solemn 7-year-old carrying a true thing that not one adult would take from her hands. Exactly, precisely as I was, 3 floors down and a whole world away in rank, the man in the hat and the girl in the pinafore, the only 2 souls under that beautiful roof who could see the shape of what was happening, and neither of us able to make a single grown-up look. It all came to its head at the very end of that summer. There was to be a great family gathering at Marlow. A proper one, relatives down from all over, a handful of the family's oldest and most trusted friends, a celebration of something or other. I've honestly forgotten the occasion itself because of everything else that happened that day. The point was that it was rare. The whole family together under one roof all at once, which, with lives like theirs scattered to their 1,000 duties, almost never happened. And I knew I'd assembled it, piece by piece, from the corners and the after-hours rooms, and a dozen overheard half-sentences that only meant something once you laid them side by side. I knew that Vesper Hale had been steering towards something that was meant to happen around this gathering. Some arrangement. Some document to be signed, some decision to be quietly agreed, some single moment when the family would be gathered and happy and distracted and trusting, their guard fully down, and in that moment she would get a thing set in motion that would lock her web shut for good, make her position permanent, put something into her hands over the affairs, over the money, over the access that, once given, she could never again be eased out of. The gathering wasn't a risk to her plan. The gathering was her plan. The perfect cover, everyone too glad and too busy to read the small print. And I had no proof. I want to keep saying that because it's the whole agony of where I stood. I had the shape, and the certainty, and not one single shred of anything I could carry to anyone with authority. A guard cannot walk up to the family in the middle of a celebration and announce that he has a bad feeling about the woman they all love. I'd have been thanked, gently and humored, and walked quietly back to my post, and noted ever after as the guard who'd had a funny turn, a man who'd stood too long in too much sun and started imagining plots in the shadows. So on the morning of the gathering I stood my post with my stomach turned to a cold stone, and I watched the cars come up the long drive one after another, and I watched Vesper Hale move through all of it, warm, smooth, smiling, everywhere at once, indispensable, the gracious spider at the dead center of a web she'd spent a year spinning. And I knew with a sick, helpless certainty that I was about to stand here, still and silent and useless as the furniture I'd trained myself to be, and watch her win. What I did not know, what I could not have guessed, was that a 7-year-old girl in a good dress was, that very afternoon, about to stand up and do the one thing I had spent all those months unable to do. And that is where I have to leave the first part of it. Because what little Elise did at that gathering, in front of every assembled member of the family and every one of their guests, in the bright crowded heart of the celebration, what she finally said out loud, in the clear and merciless and utterly unanswerable voice of a child who has simply run out of patience with not being believed, it cracked the whole careful thing wide open. It was not subtle. It was not clever or careful or grown-up. It was a 7-year-old standing up in a roomful of adults and naming, in plain and terrible words, the exact thing that all of those clever grown-ups had been far too polite and too trusting, and too thoroughly charmed to let themselves see. And in the very instant she said it, in the silence that dropped over that room like a stone into a still pond, I, the guard who had known for months and never once been able to speak, finally had my opening. Because a child saying a thing out loud changes everything in a way that nothing else can. A child's plain accusation, dropped into a silent room, becomes a thing that is suddenly there, in the open, that can't be quietly patted on the head and folded away like all the times before. A child saying it forces every adult in the room, just for one cracked open second, to actually stop and turn and look. And in that 1 second, that one narrow second when the grown-ups were finally, against all their good manners, looking, I had something to put into it. Something I'd been carrying silent for months. Something that, set down beside a little girl's accusation at exactly the right moment, would turn a child's whim into a case that could not be waved away. The child opened the door that I had stood outside of, helpless, all summer long. And I walked through it. The gathering was in the long drawing room, with the doors thrown open to the terrace and the gold afternoon light coming in across the lawns. It was a lovely thing to look at, I'll give it that. 40-odd people, the family and their relations and their oldest friends, drinks in hand, that warm, easy hum of people glad to be together. The children were there too, brought in scrubbed and dressed, allowed to run about a bit at the edges before being collected for the formal part. And moving through all of it, gracious and smiling, the perfect hostess by proxy, was Vesper Hale. I was posted just inside the terrace doors, Stone, as always, watching. And I could see it coming together, her moment. There was a leather folder on a side table near where the family had gathered papers, a pen laid neatly across them, and Vesper kept drifting near it, steering the conversation gently, that warm, capable way she had, toward while we're all together and might as well get the tedious bits done and just a formality, really. Setting the table. Waiting for the right soft moment to slide the folder in front of the right person, in the middle of all the good feeling, when no one would think to read it twice. I watched her do it and I could do nothing. I was furniture. I had no proof and no standing and no voice. The cold stone in my stomach was a boulder by now. And then a small clear voice cut straight across the warm hum of the room. Why does Mrs. Hale want you to sign that? It was Elise. She'd stopped in the middle of the floor in her good dress, and she was looking at the leather folder, and then at Vesper with those big solemn eyes. And she'd said it loud, loud enough that the people nearest turned, with that indulgent half-smile grown-ups put on for a child's interruption. Vesper laughed lightly. "Oh, it's just boring grown-up paperwork, sweetheart. Nothing for you two. You've been waiting all day to make them sign it," Elise said. The room's hum dropped a notch. Not because anyone believed her, a child's outburst, but because she hadn't stopped, hadn't been laughed off, and there was something in how flatly certain she sounded. "Elise," one of the family said gently, a warning. "Don't be rude, darling." But the little girl didn't look at them. She looked straight at Vesper Hale, and her chin was up, and she said the thing she'd been trying to say all summer to grown-ups who'd patted her head, said it now, in a room full of 40 people, in the plain, merciless voice of a child who has finally decided she will be heard. "She's not nice when you're not looking," Elise said. "She's only nice when you're looking. She made Brearley go away, and she said it was because he was old, but it wasn't. It was because Brearley didn't like her either. And she goes in the offices at night, I've seen her, and she wants everything to go through her so you can't talk to anyone but her." The words tumbled out fast now, everything at once, a dam breaking. "She's making it so she's in charge of everything and you don't even know, and nobody believes me. Nobody believes me, but it's true." And the room went absolutely silent. It's a strange thing, what a child saying a true thing out loud does to a room of adults. For a second, just a second, there was that reflex. The reflex to smooth it over, to laugh, to say children, honestly, to apologize to poor Mrs. Hale for the little one's imagination and move on. I watched it move across the faces. The pull toward the easy thing, the polite thing. And I watched Vesper Hale reach for it. Her face had gone through something fast, a flash of pure cold fury there and gone, that I caught because I'd been watching her for a year, and the children weren't the only ones who could read the face under the face. And then she settled back into the warmth, smooth as ever, and she gave a sad, indulgent little laugh and spread her hands. "Oh, the poor lamb," she said, all gentle concern. "She's never warmed to me, has she? I think I'm the one who's always saying bedtime and no more sweets, that's all. Children do take against." And that was the moment. That 1 second where the room hung between believing the warm grown-up and believing the solemn child, tipping toward the grown-up the way rooms always do. That was the second I'd been carrying months for. I broke my post. I'd never done anything like it. 20-some years a statue, and I stepped forward off my place by the terrace doors, into the room, in full uniform, and every head turned, because a guard moving in a room like that is its own small earthquake. "Forgive me," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I shouldn't speak, but the child is telling the truth, and I can't stand here and watch her not be believed, because I've seen it too." You could have heard a pin drop on the lawn. I kept my eyes on the senior member of the family, the one the folder was meant for. "I'm only a guard, sir. I see things and I say nothing, that's the job. But I've watched this house for a year, and I've watched what the little princess watched. The night work in the offices, I've seen it. Mr. Brearley eased out and Mrs. Hale's own people eased in. I've watched it happen post by post. The family's old friends kept at arm's length and everything rooted through one set of hands." I nodded toward the folder. "And I'd ask you, sir, before you sign anything today, with respect, I'd ask you to have someone you trust who is not Mrs. Hale read every word of what's in that folder first. That's all. Just read it. With your own people. Today, before anyone signs." I'd just thrown away my career, most likely. A guard accusing a trusted member of the household, in front of the whole family, on the strength of what he'd seen. If I was wrong, I was finished. But I wasn't wrong, and the room had stopped tipping toward Vesper, because now it wasn't a child's whim. It was a child's accusation and a guard's witness, the same shape from two people who'd had no chance to compare notes, the 7-year-old and the man in the hat, separately, independently, describing the identical thing. And two people seeing the same shape from opposite ends of a house. is not a whim anymore. It's a pattern. Vesper Hale knew it the instant the room turned. I saw the knowledge land on her. She tried, still people like her always try, right to the end. The warm laugh came again, thinner now. This is extraordinary. Am I to be accused by a child and a doorman? And there it was, the contempt slipping out at last, the word doorman with a curl on it, the real Vesper showing through the crack. I've given this family a year of. Then you won't mind us reading the folder, said the family member quietly. He'd gone very still, and he reached out and picked up the leather folder himself and held it and looked at her over it. If it's just a formality, Vesper, you won't mind at all if Hartley and the family's own solicitor go through it this afternoon, will you? And Vesper Hale's smooth, warm face, for one last second, was neither smooth nor warm. It was the face under the face, the cold, quick, calculating thing I'd glimpsed 100 times in the corners of that house and never been able to make anyone else see. And now 40 people saw it. She didn't sign anyone up to anything that day. The folder went off to be read by people who answered to the family and not to her. And whatever was in it, I never learned every detail that went into rooms above me. It was enough. Enough that Vesper Hale did not work for the family very much longer. Enough that the careful web she'd spent a year spinning came down, strand by strand, in the weeks after. She'd nearly had it. One soft afternoon, one folder, one moment of everyone being too happy and too polite to look closely. That's all it would have taken. And a 7-year-old wouldn't let the room be too polite to look. Here's the thing I've turned over most in the years since. The grown-ups didn't believe Elise all summer for a reason that wasn't stupidity and wasn't unkindness. They didn't believe her because they were decent, because decent people give other people the benefit of the doubt, because Vesper was warm and helpful and they'd taken her in, and to believe a child's dark report about her would have meant being suspicious, ungenerous, willing to think the worst of someone who'd only ever been lovely to their faces. Their disbelief was made of good qualities: trust, generosity, manners, the reluctance to think ill of a friend. And that's exactly the thing people like Vesper Hale feed on. They don't get past the walls. They get past the manners. They count on decent people being too decent to look closely, too polite to check the folder, too trusting to believe the 7-year-old over the warm grown-up. A child doesn't have all that decency yet to be exploited. A child just sees the cold face under the warm one and says so. We spend our whole lives learning to override that, to be gracious, to give the benefit of the doubt, to not make a scene over a feeling. And mostly that's good, that's civilization, that's how we live together. But every now and again, it's the very thing that nearly lets the wolf finish its work. And it takes someone who hasn't learned the manners yet to stand up in a room full of polite adults and say the rude, true, unbearable thing out loud. Elise said it. And because she said it, I could say it. And because we both said it separately the same, they finally looked. And that's where the second part has to end. Because there was an aftermath. The unwinding of everything Vesper had built, the people she'd eased out brought back where they could be, old Brearley among them. The circle opened up again, the family slowly understanding the full size of what had nearly happened to them, and how close and how blind they'd been. There were apologies owed to a guard, and most of all to a small girl who'd been telling the truth all along and been told, every time, not to tell tales. And there was Elise herself, who'd carried a true thing alone all summer, disbelieved by everyone she loved, and who'd finally been proven right in front of all of them, which is a strange and complicated thing for a child, being right about something the grown-ups should have caught. What the family did to make it right for me, but far more importantly for her, is the last part of it. And it started with the senior member of that family crossing the room, in front of everyone, and kneeling down to the level of a 7-year-old girl to say 3 words that grown-ups almost never say to children. You were right. He knelt down to her, the senior member of the family, In front of 40 people, in his good clothes, on the drawing room floor, down to the eye level of a 7-year-old girl. "Elise," he said, "look at me. I owe you something, and I'm going to say it in front of everyone because everyone heard us not believe you, so everyone should hear this too." He took a breath. "You were right. All summer you tried to tell us and we told you not to tell tales. And you were right and we were wrong, and I'm sorry." The little girl looked at him. And here's the thing, she didn't beam the way you might expect. She didn't crow, didn't say "I told you so," none of that. Her chin wobbled and her eyes filled, and what came out of her was small and almost cross. "I said," I kept saying, "and nobody." "I know," he said. "I know you did. I heard you say it and I patted your head and told you to be polite. I'll carry that. You shouldn't have had to say it more than once." And he opened his arms and she went into them, and the cross little face crumpled into his shoulder, and he held her while the room stood silent, and more than a few of those 40 grown-ups quietly wiped their eyes. That's a thing I've thought about a great deal since. The strange, heavy weight of a child being right. We imagine it'd feel like triumph. It doesn't. Watching Elise, I understood that being right when you're 7 and the grown-ups were wrong isn't a victory at all. It's a loss of something. Because all summer she'd been carrying a frightening true thing alone, and underneath the frustration of not being believed, there'd been a deeper thing she probably couldn't name. The discovery that the grown-ups, the big, safe, all-knowing grown-ups who are supposed to see everything and protect you from everything, could be fooled, could miss the wolf in the room, could be wrong about something enormous, right under their own roof. That's a hard thing for a child to learn. It's one of the ends of childhood, really, the day you find out the adults don't actually see everything, that you sometimes see more clearly than they do, that the world's safety rests partly on you now too. Elise learned it at 7, and being proven right didn't give her anything back. It just confirmed the frightening thing. I really did see it, and they really didn't, and I really was alone in it. So the kneeling down mattered more than anyone there probably understood. You were right, and you shouldn't have had to say it twice. It wasn't just an apology. It was a grown-up taking the weight back off the child, saying, "You don't have to carry the watching alone. We see it now. We've got it. You can be 7 again." That's the gift you give a child who's been right about something they should never have had to be right about. You don't just thank them. You take the job back. The unwinding took weeks. Vesper Hale was gone within days, quietly, the way these things are done, no public scandal, but gone, and gone for good. Her web pulled down strand by strand once people who actually answered to the family started pulling at it. I don't know everything that was in that folder. I know it was enough. I know there were other things found too, once they knew to look. Once a year of small, reasonable wrong things got laid out side by people finally willing to see the shape. It was bad. It would have been very bad if it had gone through. They'd been closer to real harm than any of them had let themselves believe. And the people she'd eased out came back, where they could. That was the part that gladdened me most. Old Brearley, the steward, the good man, eased toward the door on the kind pretext of his age. Brearley was asked back. I was there the day he returned, and I'll tell you, the old boy stood in the hall and looked around at the house. He'd served his whole life and couldn't speak for a minute. And the first thing he did, once he'd got himself together, was go and find little Elise, because word had got round of who'd said the thing out loud, and he bowed to her. This dignified old man, a deep proper bow, and said, "Your Highness, I'm given to understand I have you to thank for my coming home." And Elise, 7 years old, went very pink and said, "You were nice to me, and she made you go, so." So, as if that explained everything, as if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. You were kind and she hurt you for it, so I told. Maybe it is the simplest arithmetic in the world, and we're the ones who have made it complicated. They didn't forget me either, which I hadn't expected and didn't need. I'd broken my post, stepped off my place and spoken in front of the whole family, accused a trusted member of the household, a hanging offense near enough for a man in my position if I'd been wrong. I half expected, once the dust settled, to be quietly moved on regardless, the guard who'd made a scene. Instead, the senior member of the family sought me out on my post a week or so after. The officers with him stepped back, and he said, "You knew, same as she did, for how long?" "Months, sir," I admitted. "I'm sorry, I should have found a way to." "To what?" he said. "To tell us. You did try in your way, didn't you? You watched, and you waited for the one moment your word might land because you knew that any moment before that it wouldn't. A guard accusing Mrs. Hale on a hunch, we'd have thanked you and ignored you, and you knew it." He shook his head. "You held your fire until the child gave you covering fire. That's not cowardice. That's a man who understood exactly how little anyone would listen to him and waited for the 1 second they would." I didn't have anything to say to that. It was truer than I'd have put it myself. "You're the eyes we forget we have," he said. "All of you, standing there. We walk past you like you're stone and you see everything." He paused. "We won't forget it again, not this house." That was the whole of it. No meddle, no fuss. Just a man telling a guard he'd been seen. After 22 years of being furniture, it was more than enough. Here's what I've kept from it. The lesson, if there is one, and I think there is. The thing that nearly let Vesper Hale win wasn't anyone's stupidity. It was everyone's decency. The family didn't believe Elise because they were trusting, generous, well-mannered people who didn't like to think the worst of someone who'd been warm to them. Every brick of their blindness was made of a virtue. And that's the terrible secret of how people like Vesper operate. They don't break through the walls of a good house. They walk in through the front door of its good manners. They count on decent people being too decent to check the folder, too polite to believe the rude truth, too trusting to take the 7-year-old's word over the smiling grown-ups. The defense against that isn't to become hard or suspicious or to stop trusting people. That'd be its own kind of loss. The defense is simpler and stranger than that. It's to listen to the child who keeps saying the same thing, to take seriously the person who reads the face under the face, the one who hasn't yet learned to override what they see with what they're supposed to believe, to not pat the watcher on the head and tell them not to tell tales. Because somewhere in almost every house where something quietly goes wrong, there's someone who sees it. A child, maybe, or a guard. Or anyone who watches more than they speak, who's been treated as furniture long enough to have stopped being seen and started instead to see. And the only thing that house needs, the only thing standing between it and the wolf, is for the loud, trusting grown-ups to go quiet, just once, and believe the quiet watching one. Elise was the quiet watching one. And so, in my way, 3 floors down, was I, and the house was luckier than it knew, that when it finally mattered, the two of us said the same true thing at the same moment, and they finally looked. She grew up, of course, they do. I stayed at Marlowe a good while longer, and I watched Princess Elise get taller summer by summer, get less solemn, get to be just a girl, a clever, watchful girl, but a girl, allowed to be one, the weight taken back off her where it belonged. She'd wave to me sometimes from across the lawns. And once, years on, when she was nearly grown and I was nearly done, she stopped by my post and said out of nowhere, "Do you remember Mrs. Hale?" "I remember, Your Highness." "I was right about her," she said, not boasting, just settling it the way you do with an old thing. "You were," I said. "You were the only one who saw it clear, and you wouldn't stop saying so, even when it cost you, even when no one believed you. That's a rare thing in a person. It was rare in you at 7, and it'll be rare in you at 70. She thought about that, and then she said the thing I've carried ever since, this girl who'd learned at 7 that grown-ups can be fooled and watchers have to speak. "It's not hard to see it," she said. "People show you who they are when they think you're not looking. You just have to be a person they think isn't looking." A small wry smile. "Like a guard or a kid. Nobody thinks we're looking." And then she waved and went on across the lawn and left me standing on my post, thinking that a 7-year-old had understood, all those years before, the entire secret of my trade. Nobody thinks the furniture is looking. but the furniture sees everything. And every so often, when a child is brave enough to say it out loud, and a guard is brave enough to back her, the furniture gets to speak. And the wolf gets shown the door.